Welcome, fellow horror hounds, and welcome to the latest episode of Talk and Stalk, your unholy home for horror. I'm your host, as always, Barry, and today's podcast is devoted to what, in my opinion, is one of the greatest slasher sequels of all time, and that is Scream 2. Now, Scream 2, as I said, I actually think it's a sequel that holds up really well to the first movie. In fact, I'd pretty much put this in the same league as 1996's Scream. And, you know, this movie was actually released just a year after the first film. It's a film that was very much rushed into production. Scream was released at the end of 1996, quickly becoming the most successful slasher movie of all time. So I suppose, in a way, it was almost inevitable that there was probably going to be a sequel. And we did. We got Scream 2. Now, as I said, Scream 2 was pretty much rushed into production. I believe they started writing the story for this film. The script was being written just after the release of the first movie, and or believe it was actually not long after production, so it was actually probably just before the release of Scream when this film actually started writing. Now, you know, Kevin Williamson wrote the screenplay again, being directed by Wes Craven, who of course would go on to direct all four movies. Scream 2 is a sequel that I pretty much put on par, almost. You know, the opening to the original Scream is great. It's pretty iconic. It's like, you know, how can you top that? You know, the death of Casey Becker, obviously played by Drew Barrymore. I think the opening to this film is great. With Jada Pinkett's death. You know, it's like, how can you possibly top the opening to the first Scream? Well, you probably can't, but you can get something that's pretty damn good. And just that scene, which is really quite haunting, actually. She's being brutally stabbed and killed in front of a horde of onlookers, all dressed in Ghostface costumes. You know, in a very public place, a cinema. They all think it's part of the act. And, you know, the kind of film within a film, a tiff, which was, you know, kind of done in 1980s. He Knows You're Alone, in fact. You know, and I just thought a great, impactful opening. I love the whole film within a film thing here, that we actually get to see this fictional movie, this movie that actually exists within the confines of Scream 2, of Stab. Heather Graham playing the role of Casey Becker, and it being directed by Robert Rodriguez as well. And I'm just going to quickly get this off the bat as well. I believe there was a criticism, actually, with the first Scream, of there being no African-American characters. There's one African-American character that's seen briefly. He's a newspaper reporter. He's literally on screen for about 3 seconds. Scream 2 gets right off the bat in kind of addressing this. The exclusion of African-American characters in horror films and that. It's a discussion that Jada has with her boyfriend, played by... his name is actually escaped, Omar Epps. And we kind of get in that discussion right from the get-go. Now, there's a great new welcome addition of cast members in this film as well. We get the likes of Jerry O'Connell as Derek. We get Mickey, who's played by Timothy Olyphant. Of course, Cece Cooper, played by Sarah Michelle Gellar, who was in I Knew What You Did Last Summer, not long before this. And of course, now this film has actually got 4 stars in it that were actually starring in ongoing TV shows at the time as well. She'd recently been cast as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Sarah Michelle Gellar. Jerry O'Connell was actually starring in the TV show Sliders. Courtney Cox, of course, was in Friends. And, of course, Neve Campbell, Party of 5. Of course, David Arquette is back. Neve Campbell's back. Courtney Cox. Jamie Kennedy reprising his role as Randy. One of my personal favourite characters. So, yeah, just talk about the movie itself. Again, there's plenty of references to the world of horror and pop culture in general, in fact, in this film. Screenwriter Kevin Williamson actually does make a cameo in this film, as he's the guy that's actually interviewing Cotton Weary, who actually plays a fairly sizable role, actually, in this film. And I think for a lot of people probably watching upon first-time viewing would probably be considered kind of a prime suspect. We even get Portia de Rossi and Rebecca Gayheart in kind of a minor role. There are a couple of sorority girls, because the movie's actually moved from a small town to a college campus for this movie, which is following the trope of many slasher movies. Actually, the whole college campus thing is quite a common, frequent setting for slasher movies. And, let's just talk about, like, for example, one of the deaths of the movie, Cece Cooper, Sarah Michelle Gellar, which I think there's a great little nod, actually, because one of the movies that actually appears on the TV as she's watching it is actually Nosferatu, the granddaddy of vampire films, 1922. And, of course, she was starring in Buffy the Vampire Slayer at the time. I just thought that was great, a nice little touch. I love the fact when her friend over the telephone's trying to scare her and she's doing the kill, 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 ma, ma, ma. Nice little kind of Friday the 13th there, isn't that, as well? I'll admit, with Scream 2, I think generally speaking it's a really good screenplay. It doesn't maybe... It's evident in the telephone calls, which again are courtesy of Roger L. Jackson, who just has a perfect voice for this. Such a menacing voice. Is that the movie is a sequel, and it kind of knows that. It knows that. Randy actually addresses during the film, when he's actually being taunted over the telephone, he actually says, "Is that the best you've got to come up with? Because Stu and Billy were a lot more original." And he actually addresses this fact that the killer doesn't seem to have as much originality as what the killer did in the first Scream movie. And it is a sequel, which Randy actually says earlier on in the film. As definition alone, sequels are inferior films, which I actually disagree with. I actually think there are sequels out there that are better, or at least arguably better than the first film. Okay, not the majority, they're probably in the minority, but I think we're certainly in an age now where there are sequels that are certainly living up to their first film, if not arguably surpassing it. Scream. So in this, it's obviously a copycat killer, somebody trying to create their very own sequel. And I think Randy's death in this movie was really kind of a gut punch, really kind of unexpected, obviously proving to be one of the more popular characters of the first movie, and to have him killed off. And then we actually find out, of course, in the third film that he wasn't a virgin, he actually lost his virginity, hence why he didn't survive. But I love when he's sitting there in the diner and they're talking about, going through the suspects, and he says to do like, if I'm a suspect, then you're a suspect. And he says, "What's with the limp anyway?" So the film, even though Dewey survived and proved to be innocent in the first movie, the movie does wryly point its finger that, hang on a sec, Dewey's back on the scene, could he be the killer? Is the limp actually created? Is it being falsified? It certainly points in that kind of direction. And then it says about Hallie gets mentioned. Of course, there's always room for Candyman's daughter. Killers are typically white males. Well, and he actually brings up, again, a nice little Friday the 13th reference, where he actually says Miss Voorhees made a terrific killer. So yeah, the movie certainly points towards its suspects. Now, there's obviously an attack on Derek, played by Jerry O'Connell in the movie, which again would imply, hang on a sec, is he actually involved? Are we looking at one killer here, or are there actually two killers? And there is a scene in the movie, actually. It's the scene in which I actually like the whole setting for it. She's in the sorority house on her own, and Cece's getting the telephone call, and we actually see the killer move behind her. So that's, I think, when we kind of know, hang on a sec, there are two killers. Now, I'll be completely honest, the identity to, and this obviously follows in the footsteps of the first film, there are two killers. I actually found the killer reveal very surprising for one of the killers. That it is, in fact, Debbie Salt, who doesn't actually exist. It's a false name. It's Mrs. Loomis, Billy Loomis's mother, who's getting revenge for her son. That threw me off. When I first watched this movie, now bearing in mind it was my younger self, I was about 17, 18 years old when I first watched it. And I remember being so excited for Scream 2 because, I watched the first movie, so many times on VHS, and I wasn't old enough to see Scream 2 at the cinema. And as soon as it came out on VHS, my mum rented it, and And I just remember being so shocked with that killer reveal. She was never a suspect in my eyes. And again, I just love the nod, the homage it makes to Mrs. Voorhees' reveal in Friday the 13th. It's a mother getting revenge. And the Mickey reveal, again, I think Timothy Olyphant does a good... certainly in the final act, He's a character that probably could have got a little more screen time, but I think you actually kind of forget about him. Certainly in the final act of the movie, we don't actually see or hear of Mickey for quite some time, and I think some people actually forget about him. So yeah, in that final act, I think he does a really good job. We get to see, you know, how kind of crazed he is. I love the... he's using the kind of modern motive. He's going to blame the movies, etc. You know, he's going to use that whole trope, and you know, he obviously wants the camera to be on him, the sensationalism of the trial and all this and that. And they actually, him and Mrs. Loomis actually met online, and she's been kind of grooming him, if you will, to be this killer and that. And I love the Sarah Connor reference near the end as well, where he actually said, you've got a Sarah Connor thing going on. That's cool. Because earlier on in the movie, in fact, it's quite a nice, a good little scene, actually, that I like, where Joshua Jackson actually appears. Joshua Jackson has little more than an extended cameo in this film. They're talking about sequels. Terminator 2 gets mentioned. He brings up Terminator 2. Mickey does. He also brings up Aliens as well. And Sarah Michelle Gellar's character, Cece, actually says, you got hard on for Cameron. But I will admit, they are two great sequels that live up to the first. I know some people that would say they are arguably better than their first movies. And then, of course, Joshua Jackson's character brings up, you know, House 2, the second story. Of course, he's being sarcastic. Well, I'd like to think so anyway, because I thought it was terrible. But, so yeah, he comes up with another Cameron reference towards the end of the film. And, yeah, I think with this film as well, I think we get the good chemistry. I love the banter, the back and forth, if you will, between Courtney Cox and David Arquette, who are actually, they were actually sleeping together at this point. They were actually dating. In the first film, I think they were just flirting. That was kind of a first time meeting. But they were basically an item during the second movie. And I just love the chemistry between them two. Dewey is really kind of there for comic relief. As the franchise has gone on, it's clear that he's a character. It feels like they're certainly very scared to kill him off. Now, I'll admit, the scene, which I actually think is a really good chase sequence in the studio that they're in, with Dewey's death, if you want to call it that, was quite brutal and quite a gut punch. The music that accompanies it as well. I actually thought that was a great moment, but then again, we actually find out he's survived again. Because originally, of course, he was supposed to be killed off in the first movie, but proved to be, you know, too likeable of a character. So they had him survive, and then he survived this film again. But had that have been a death, that was, yeah. So yeah, it's kind of like, I don't know, Jason and Michael Myers could probably go to Dewey for tips. You know, Cece's death, she's actually thrown over the balcony. And of course, we get, there's two coppers that are killed in the film as well. During what I actually think leads on to one of the highlights of the movie. I actually think it's a great sequence, actually. It's the moment where the killer is unconscious in the front of the car and they can't get out through the doors and they have to climb over the killer to get out of the car. It's really a suspenseful moment, and you're just waiting for that jump scare. You're just waiting for it. You know, it's that anticipation that it puts you through. I thought that was a really good sequence, in fact. Of course, it's a false jump scare. Wes Craven's leading you down a false path. But of course, when they go back, the killer's gone. Which, again, is the usual kind of Michael Myers trope. I'd love to know how the killer got out. I'd love to know how they got past Hallie and Sydney. They've got the Michael Myers teleportation skills or whatever. Just like in the TV studio as well. You know, Ghostface is 1 minute up at the top of the stairs, and the next minute, like 10 seconds later, behind Dewey. I'm not sure if they teleported there or what. But yeah, again, just a great sequence. Now, you know, there's a scene, again, I think there's a great, with the character of Derek. Derek isn't he's the kind of the likeable kind of guy. He's not I wouldn't say he's the kind of, as such charismatic characters that obviously Stu and Randy and that are. But there's a great sense of, how do I put it, protectiveness that he has towards Sydney. And he was a definite suspect for me when I first watched this film. When he's actually attacked and we see him, his arm cut, and you just see Sidney Prescott's face. as if to say, this is all happening again, can I actually trust him? Because the last time, her boyfriend was killed, it turned out he was actually one of the two killers. So yeah, and in regards to as well another film that gets mentioned at the party sequence, that if you blink and you'll miss it, which most people have done, is Matthew Lillard, but played Stu from the first Scream, actually appears in the background at the party sequence with bleached blonde hair. I'll admit, I'd seen this film loads of times. I'd never noticed him until quite recently. It's because he was actually visiting the set. He was actually dating Neve Campbell at the time. And we actually get The Empire Strikes Back mentioned during that sequence as well, where Randy actually says that it's technically, it's not a sequel. It's all planned to be a trilogy, etc. But I agree, Empire Strikes Back is a great movie that, in my opinion, is even better than Star Wars. David Warner, a legendary actor, in my opinion. Too many acting credits to his name. Obviously, from 1976's The Omen, actually appears as the theatre manager, theatre tutor, I think he is. And we get this whole kind of sequence that explores the kind of the tragic nature of, this play that she's in is very much kind of mirroring Sydney's life. And, bringing this kind of sense of, as I said, tragicness to it. And we get this sequence where she's doing this big play and there's a Ghostface, presumably. Now, I'm going to assume that she was imagining it, because when the person's removed his mask, Ghostface is nowhere to be seen, that Ghostface costume in that. So that she was actually imagining it. But, there's another scene in the movie as well that I know some people kind of complain and stuff and I fully get it. It kind of slows the pace of the movie down. But I think, to be honest, to me personally, it kind of humanises the moment. It's where Derek does that big song and dance in the canteen. It's the song from 1986's Top Gun. And he gets up on the table and he does this big show and everyone's loving it and all that and whatever. I know some people that really don't like... No, I think what's great as well, he actually gives her this pendant. He gives her this pendant, puts her around. He basically tells her, look, I'm always going to be here. And she actually gets to use that as a weapon later on in the film, which I actually think is a great line that she comes out with, actually, just before she uses it. It's where she says to Mickey, she says, you forget one thing about Billy Loomis. And he says, what's that? He goes, I fucking killed him. And then she attacks him. To me, Sidney Prescott is a great scream queen. With all that she goes through, I think Neve Campbell's a really good actress. I know people that really don't like her, really don't take to her. I'm not one of them people. I think she's a great scream queen. I think she is the best scream queen, certainly since Heather Langenkamp from Nightmare on Elm Street. If not Laurie Strode, Halloween. She's so resilient, and I think she's a good actress. And so, with regards to the film as well, we also get, now I'm not sure if a lot of people know this, but Louis Arquette, David Arquette's father, is actually in this movie. As his character name is actually escaping me, but he's the police chief. And he actually gets to share one scene with his son, David. Where he actually, I can't remember what he says to him now. He says something to him and he pats him on the shoulder and walks off. So father and son get this little one on-screen little moment and that. I think with Scream 2, what it does, it does what Randy says it does. Scream 2 has a higher body count than the first film. I think there's more blood. It certainly felt like that. The deaths themselves felt a little bloody. I mean, certainly with Randy's death, that is overkill, where he's actually dragged into the van, which I actually thought was a great moment. I realised it was kind of a gut punch, and I think a lot of people thought it was a big risk killing off a character like Randy. But at the same time, I commend it when risks are taken. I think if you don't take risks sometimes, you run the risk of your franchise or whatever becoming formulaic. And I love the build-up to it, where he goes through the killers. What is it? He says Manson, Bundy, Gacy, OJ. I know you can't say that because he was acquitted, but yeah. And he mentions the slasher movies that were kind of like the lesser known, if you will, the slasher movies that aren't the Halloweens and the Friday the 13th. When he goes through this list of, high school slasher movies, I believe he mentions The Dawn That Dripped Blood. He mentions Graduation Day. I'm pretty certain he mentions Final Exam. And I think he might mention The House on Sorority Row as well. I'm pretty certain he mentions 4 slasher movies during that sequence. So yeah, and in regards, again, getting back to the movie itself, the opening of this film, I just thought the opening to this film's really great. The scene in which Omar Epps goes into the toilet and actually presses his ear, against the thing, and then we get the knife through the ear, which of course was parodied in Scary Movie, but obviously it wasn't a knife. I'm sure you all know what it was. And we get that sequence as well later on in the film where Sidney Prescott is actually, in the library, and she gets a message on the computer, and then Cotton Weary kind of comes out of nowhere, and that's where the movie certainly points to it being Cotton Weary. But then you kind of think to yourself, his life has essentially been destroyed because of Sidney Prescott. But he's now got out. Would you really risk going back inside? But at the end of the day, I suppose it's a movie, so any possible motive is a possibility and whatever. But I think when I first watched this movie, I certainly thought that Cotton Weary was kind of a prime suspect in that for me. But yeah, I think the movie overall does a really good job. I think it does a good job. I think that the movie might not have as many, say, memorable sequences as the first Scream. I really think it's quite tragic, actually, as well, that she, just before Derek is killed, that she actually doubts Derek because of the seed that Mickey actually planted in her head. I couldn't possibly do this alone. I had to have her help. And then, him talking to Derek as if he's the other killer. And then he shoots, of course, Derek, and right to the end, and Derek actually says he would never hurt her. I really think that's quite a tragic moment, actually. But yeah, for his last few minutes of being alive, that she suspects that her boyfriend is the killer. But I think overall it's a really solid sequel that certainly does have, to me, a lot of highlights. I know it's generally not as well revered as the first movie. I know that not that Rotten Tomatoes is gospel or anything like that, but I know its Rotten Tomatoes score is actually very high. Its reviews are very good, and again, like the first Scream, it was a big box office success. Scream 2 made a lot of money, and deservedly so. I know there's people out there that don't like the Scream films. That's fair enough. That they prefer the Golden Age slasher films. And don't get me wrong, I absolutely love the Golden Age slasher movies, but I do love Scream as well. Because I think what Scream gave us, especially the first movie, was just a great love letter to the subgenre. Just a movie that paid homage, it paid respect. I think for die-hard horror fans out there, I just loved the amount of Easter eggs, the plethora of references and that it had. As well as a cool-looking costume, with the Ghostface costume. So I think, as I said, I think Scream 2 is one of the best slasher sequels ever made. Unfortunately, I do think the franchise actually started to go a bit downhill after Scream 2. I think Scream 3 is kind of a fun slasher movie, but at that point, it was becoming a little bit too meta for its own good, and I think it was almost starting to become a parody of itself. And at the same time, Scream rides a very fine line because it is horror, but at the same time, it doesn't take itself too seriously at times. But it does take itself seriously when it needs to. That's the thing with Scream. It's not outright comedy. There is comedy. Certainly, I think especially the first 2 films, I think they have great screenplays, and like I said, Ghostface might not come out, he certainly doesn't, in fact, doesn't come out with the great lines that are uttered in the first movie, but I don't know if that is down to the fact of maybe Kevin Williamson couldn't repeat that such, or the fact that it is a sequel, and as Randy said, the sequels aren't as good, aren't as original, or whatever, you know. But yeah, I think the film has a lot of good moments. As I said, I think it has a really good opening. It's it's the second best opening in the franchise. Let's put it that way. It has some good, likable new characters, certainly. Again, a really good whodunit. I think there's actually probably more suspects this time round with this movie. As I said in the original screenplay, there was a lot of, when Scream 2 was announced, a lot of people were excited because the first Scream was a really popular movie. And, right from the get-go, people were like, conjecture. I mean, the thing is, the internet was nowhere near as big as what it is now. It would be leaked online quickly, I'm sure. That's why I'm trying to steer clear of any kind of teasers or anything for the fifth Scream movie. I'm going to try and stay away from the internet as far as I can, because I don't want to go into the film with any kind of an ounce of an idea as to who the killer is going to be, or killers are going to be in that film. But Scream 2 followed in the footsteps of the first film, certainly. It recognises it's a sequel. We learn that the killer is trying to create their own sequel. If you dissect it completely, I mean, the fact of the first two victims share the name, and the third victim share the name of the people from the first movie, completely and utterly implausible. I mean, the odds of that, you'd have to be in an episode of The Twilight Zone, I reckon. Yeah, as I said, the sequence in the car I think is really good. We get the throat slashing, and the guy ends up with I think it's like the metal pole through his head. Great chemistry again between David Arquette and Courtney Cox, who I think are great on screen together. I love it, that kind of love-hate thing that they've got going on. Obviously they realise in this film as well that, the killer's actually recording. It's that kind of moment that we see that the killer was filming through the van, I think it was. And that's the moment we get the whole kind of chase sequence with Gale, which is probably the second best chase sequence in the franchise. The first one being Sidney's chase sequence with Ghostface in the first movie. Scream 2, great sequel, in my opinion, that really isn't that far behind the first movie. And I like the fact as well, quickly, the opening as well, where she gets a telephone call. It's like, what's your favourite scary movie in that? And then she's actually got caller ID. So she's realised. Now, interestingly, when the first Scream came out, I believe caller ID went up by fourfold. I'm pretty certain it was either 3 or 4-fold, because after the release of that movie, so many people were actually phoning up people saying, what's your favourite scary movie, etc. And so Sidney Prescott actually has a caller ID, and the guy's obviously, he's caught out, and I kind of like that little touch to it as well. So that's pretty much all I really want to talk about regarding Scream 2, a solid sequel that I'm hoping. My expectations are by no means sky high, believe me, but I'm hoping if the fifth Scream movie can get anywhere close, even to just the second, then I'd be quite happy. Also, I have to quickly note as well, the character of Joel, the cameraman, who, again, an African-American character who arrives on the scene. He doesn't get killed. Again, that could be seen as an interesting kind of twist, because he actually decides to leave before he gets killed, because he read about what happened with Kenny, the cameraman played by Wes L. Brown in the first movie. He got, gutted. He read he got gutted, and then Gale's like, no, he didn't get gutted, I made that up. He got his throat cut. Throat cut, gutted, doesn't matter. The guy's not in the union anymore, I like that. I like that little bit of kind of humour that's thrown in there as well. And interestingly as well, Gale gets hit again in this movie. Now, what's interesting, in the third film, she actually does the hit. In the first movie, she's hit. She says to Sidney, I'll send you a copy of the book. Basically calling Sidney Prescott a liar throughout the book. She believes, obviously, she was falsely identified Cotton Weary in the second film. Now, I can't quite remember what she says now. Okay, it's escaping me, I do know. But she ends up getting hit again by Sidney Prescott. So it's kind of like becoming a trend at this point. But interestingly, in the third film, she's the one that does the hit. So it's all coming around on itself. I've also got to quickly say as well that I loved, in the first Scream, Rose McGowan's character Tatum actually says to Sydney, she actually says, if you were in a film, who would play you? And Dewey actually says, I see you as a young Meg Ryan myself. And she goes, thanks, Dewey, but, knowing my luck, I'd get Tori Spelling. And in this film, we actually find out in Stab, it's Tori Spelling that's playing the role of Sidney Prescott. I love that little touch. I thought that was great. And Luke Wilson, I believe, is actually playing the role of Billy Loomis as well. I just love the whole, how it's coming around here, the whole meta-ness of it. So that's it for today's episode. Thanks a lot to everyone that listened, and I will be back again soon to haunt you and torment you. And if you've liked what you've heard, please feel free to subscribe to my channel. Any support is massively appreciated. Take care for now.